few years ago, I bought my first house in a quiet town called Oakhaven. It was an older two-story colonial, nothing fancy, but the price was right, and it came with a decent-sized yard. After renting apartments for years, finally having my own place was amazing. The feeling of unlocking my own front door for the first time was a milestone I'd been dreaming of since I was a kid. The house had a certain character that modern constructions lacked. It felt solid, permanent, like it had stories to tell. The previous owner, a retired professor named Alan Foster, had lived there for decades before moving south to be closer to family. It left behind a faint scent of old books and pipe tobacco, which I found oddly comforting in the beginning. The house was charming, if a bit worn. It had dark wooden floors that groaned with every step, creaky stairs that announced your every move, and a big master bedroom upstairs with a large window overlooking the backyard. Over the next couple of months, I did a lot of fixing up. I spent my weekends painting the dingy walls a warmer shade of cream, replacing the dated brass light fixtures with brushed nickel ones, and sanding down the stubborn kitchen cabinets. Slowly, meticulously, I was erasing the remnants of Professor Foster and making the house feel like home. It was a labor of love, and with each completed project, my connection to the old house deepened. By mid-August, the place was starting to look less like a hand-me-down and more like a reflection of my own life. In the process, I'd accumulated enough random things I no longer needed: old furniture from my apartment, duplicate sets of dishes, some tools I'd inherited and never used to justify holding a yard sale. It felt like a good way to clear that's the clutter that had migrated with me and, more importantly, a chance to maybe meet some of the neighbors I'd only waved to in passing. The morning of the sale was bright and sunny. Already hot by 9 a.m. I'd arranged a series of folding tables along the length of the driveway, stacked boxes full of books, kitchen gadgets, and other random things, and placed a few larger items like a worn armchair and a couple of mismatched lamps by the sidewalk with optimistic price tags. Business was steady. Neighbors I hadn't formally met stopped by, their curiosity about the new guy on the block finally getting the better of them. They were friendly, sharing little tidbits about the neighborhood, offering advice on the best local pizza place, and remarking on how much work I'd already put into the old Foster house. I made a few sales here and there, enough to feel like the effort was worthwhile. Around 11 a.m., I noticed an older woman slowly walking toward me from down the street. She moved with a deliberate, almost hesitant gait, as if each step required conscious thought. She wore a faded floral dress that it looked like it had seen many summers, and her gray hair was neatly pinned back in a style that seemed to belong to a bygone era. She stood out simply because I'd never seen her around before, and Oakhaven was small enough that you started to recognize the familiar faces within a few weeks. She didn't look at the tables piled high with my discarded belongings or the boxes of assorted junk. Her focus was singular. She walked straight to me, her eyes fixed not on my face, but on the house looming behind me. She paused for a long moment, studying its facade with a thoughtful, almost mournful gaze. "You live here now?" she asked, her voice soft and raspy, like dry leaves skittering across pavement. "Yeah," I replied, feeling oddly unsettled by her intense stare. It wasn't hostile, but it was heavy, weighted with some unspoken knowledge that made the hairs on my arms stand up. "Moved in a few months ago." She nodded slowly, her eyes still locked on the house. "I used to babysit the kids who lived here. A long, long time ago." She finally turned her eyes back to me. They were a clear, pale blue, but they seemed distant, as if she were looking through me, at a memory only she could see. "You should really check under the floorboards in the master bedroom," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. Not everything was found. Before I could even process the strangeness of her statement, before I could ask what she meant, who she was, or what wasn't found, she turned around. With the same deliberate pace, she began walking away, as if she'd said all she needed to say and her part in this was done. I called after her a confused, "Hey, wait," escaping my lips, but she didn't even glance back. She just kept walking, her small frame shrinking with the distance until she rounded the corner and was gone. She vanished as suddenly as she had appeared, leaving me standing alone in the hot sun, a profound sense of confusion and unease washing over me. The rest of the sale passed in a quiet blur. I sold a few more items, but my mind wasn't on making change or haggling over prices. Her words stuck with me, echoing in my head. Not everything was found. What did that even mean? Found by whom? The police, the Fosters, and what was everything? That evening, after the last of the curious neighbors had gone and I'd hauled the unsold items back into the garage, I couldn't shake what she'd said. I tried to dismiss it as the ramblings of an old woman, perhaps someone whose memories had become tangled with time, but the specificity of her statement to the master bedroom under the floorboards felt too deliberate to be a simple product of dementia. * curiosity. That powerful and often foolish motivator eventually got the better of me. I trudged upstairs to the master bedroom, the one I had so carefully painted and made my own. The evening light cast long shadows across the dark hardwood floor. I started tapping my feet across the floorboards, listening for anything unusual. feeling ridiculous as I did it. The solid thud of my heel against wood was consistent throughout most of the room. It was only when I reached the deep walk-in closet at the far end of the room that the sound changed. The floorboards there sounded hollow, the impact resonating, with a dull, empty echo compared to the rest of the room. My breath caught in my throat. I hesitated, a war raging in my mind between rational thought and a growing primal fear. Then, I knelt down, the old wood cool against my knees, and gently pressed against the boards. Sure enough, one of them lifted slightly. It was loose, just enough to pry open by hand. My pulse quickened, a frantic drumming in my ears as I worked my fingers into the gap and pulled the board up. Beneath it, nestled in a shallow cavity filled with a thin layer of dust and clumps of old insulation fibers, was a small bundle. It was wrapped in a piece of dark oil-stained cloth that looked ancient. My heart pounded harder, a sickening dread coiling in my stomach. I hesitated again, my fingers trembling slightly. Part of me wanted to push the floorboard back into place, to pretend I had never looked, to live in blissful ignorance. But it was too late for that. Reaching in, I carefully pulled the bundle out. It was heavier than I expected, and the cloth felt brittle and old, threatening to disintegrate in my hands. Nervously, my hands shaking so much I could barely control them, I unfolded a corner. My eyes widened in horror. Staring back at me were what looked unmistakably like small bones, yellowed with age, tucked inside the rotting fabric. They weren't large, but they were clearly not something you'd find by accident under a floorboard. This was deliberate. Someone had intentionally hidden these here. I quickly put the bundle down on the floor, scrambling backward until my back hit the closet wall, my heart now racing with pure panic. Who hides bones beneath the floorboards? My mind raced through a horrifying slideshow of possibilities, each darker and more gruesome than the last. Was this a pet, a small child? The thought made me feel physically ill. Without hesitating further, I grabbed my phone from my pocket and dialed 911. My voice trembled as I tried to explain the situation to the dispatcher. They arrived within half an hour. Two uniformed officers whose calm professionalism was a stark contrast to my own frayed nerves. They carefully took photographs of the bundle and the exposed cavity, bagged the gruesome discovery as evidence, and conducted a more thorough search beneath the boards, finding nothing else. They asked me a series of questions. When did I move in? Had I ever met the previous owner personally? Had I noticed anything else unusual? I had few answers for them, feeling like a stranger in my own home. Days passed in a haze of anxiety. Every creak of the old house sent a jolt of fear through me. I slept with the lights on, jumping at every shadow. Finally, the police called with an update. A detective with a weary voice assured me the bones weren't human. My relief was so profound it almost brought me to my knees. Forensic tests confirmed they belonged to an animal, likely a small dog or a cat. The bones were old, he said, at least 30 years, maybe longer. It was strange, yes, but apparently not criminal. There wasn't much else they could do. I thanked him, my voice hollow, and tried to forget about it, but I couldn't. I called the previous owner, Alan Foster, just to ask if he knew anything. He seemed genuinely confused, his voice crackling over the phone from his new home in Florida. He said he had no idea about any bones or a loose floorboard in the closet and sounded unsettled himself. He ended our call quickly, leaving me even more disturbed than before. If he didn't know, then who did? I went to the town hall and checked the public records looking for clues. The house had changed hands several times over the years, a succession of families moving in and out frequently until Foster had settled there for his long tenure. But there was nothing suspicious, nothing unusual beyond the normal sales and moves of a transient world. I kept waiting for the old woman to return, hoping she'd walk down my street again and explain her cryptic warning, but she never did. I described her to my neighbors, but no one recognized the description. She was a complete mystery, a ghost, who had appeared just long enough to unearth a dark secret before vanishing back into the ether. Nearly a year has passed, but those bones still bother me. Why would someone go to the trouble of hiding animal bones beneath the floorboards of a closet? Was it a beloved pet they couldn't bear to part with, a childish prank, or something more sinister? Why did the old woman know about them, and why did she bother telling me? But more troubling than any of those questions were her words, the ones I couldn't shake no matter how hard I tried. The words that still echo in the quiet moments of the night, when the house settles and the floors creak. Not everything was found. If those animal bones weren't what she meant, if that wasn't the everything, then what else could be hidden here? What other secrets lie buried beneath my feet, waiting in the shadows of this old house? And who, or what, is waiting for them to be found? Back in August of 2018, I decided I needed a good camera. My iPhone was fine for casual snapshots, but photography was becoming a real hobby, a creative outlet that I found myself more and more drawn to. I wanted something better, something professional looking, to mess around with on weekends. I imagined myself taking artistic shots of the Oregon landscape, maybe even getting good enough to shoot family portraits for friends. I lived in a quiet little suburb of Portland, Oregon called Beaverton. It was the kind of place with nice houses, tree-lined streets, and a tangible sense of safety. It was the perfect place to raise a family, or so I thought. Yard sales popped up every weekend, especially in the late summer, as people cleared out their clutter before the rainy season set in. So, on a sunny Saturday morning, I got up early, filled a travel mug with coffee, and started browse the neighborhood, hoping to find a bargain. It was around 10 a.m. when I found one particular house on Cedar Hills Boulevard. It was nothing special, a modest white ranch-style home with red shutters, the kind you see all over the suburbs. But the yard was cluttered with boxes, tables covered with clothes, old tools, and the general detritus of a life being dismantled. Behind a pile of old, musty-smelling books, I spotted it, a dusty black DSLR camera. It was a Nikon, a decent model, just a few years older. It felt substantial in my hands. A serious piece of equipment. The woman running the sale was probably in her late 40s, with a tired, worn-out look about her. She was sipping coffee from a chipped mug, her eyes holding a kind of resigned sadness. When I asked about the camera, she gave me a weird look, a flicker of something I couldn't quite place. Annoyance, disgust. "It belonged to my ex-husband," she mumbled, her eyes cast down at her coffee cup as if the memory was a bitter taste in her mouth. "Just take it. $20 is fine. I just want it gone." Her eagerness to be rid of it should have been a red flag, but the price was too good to pass up. $20 for a Nikon DSLR was a steal. It was an easy choice. I handed her the cash, said my thanks, and drove home, feeling pretty good about my luck. The camera was dusty, as if it had been sitting in a closet for a long time, but otherwise, it looked perfect. At home, I spent a good hour cleaning it off, carefully wiping down the lens and the body. I charged the battery and, with a sense of excitement, turned it on. The memory card inside was still loaded with photos, hundreds of them. My curiosity kicked in immediately. I figured they'd be your typical family photos, maybe some vacation shots. I started scrolling through the images, sitting on my sofa with the late morning sun shining through the windows, feeling like I was getting a little glimpse into a stranger's life. Most of the pictures seemed pretty normal at first. There were shots from a vacation at the Oregon coast, with gray dramatic skies over the Pacific. There was a cute golden retriever playing fetch in a sunny park, a series of photos of a family barbecue, with smiling faces and plates piled high with food. They were the kinds of photos anyone would have. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, the photos got darker. At first I thought the camera settings were just wrong. Or maybe the photographer was testing out different shots in low light. But something felt off, a subtle shift in tone that made me uneasy. There were pictures of someone's backyard at night. They were grainy, shadow-filled images, taken from a distance, through the gaps in a fence or the tangled branches of a bush. The perspective felt hidden, secretive. Next were zoomed-in shots of a porch, with patio furniture arranged neatly. It felt like surveillance. I kept clicking through, my heart starting to beat a little quicker, a cold knot forming in my stomach. The next picture showed a bedroom window, the curtains drawn but a soft light glowing from inside. The one after that was the same window, but closer, the focus sharper. The next one made me gasp. It was a photo of a woman asleep in her bed, the blankets pulled up around her shoulders, her face peaceful, completely unaware that she was being photographed. I felt sick. This wasn't okay. This was a profound violation. My hands trembled as I kept scrolling through the gallery of images. It was definitely someone spying on this woman, night after night. There was a whole sequence of her, in her home, going about her life, completely oblivious to the unseen eyes watching her. Then, something made my chest tighten in a vice of pure panic. The bedroom in these pictures, it looked exactly like mine. The same curtains, the same arrangement of furniture. Even the book I'd left on my nightstand looked familiar. My stomach knotted up so tightly I almost threw up. It couldn't be. It was impossible. I jumped up from the sofa and rushed to my bedroom, my head spinning, trying to convince myself it was just a coincidence. But it wasn't. The curtains were exactly like mine, the cheap beige ones I'd bought from Target last spring. The bedspread had the same floral pattern. The lamp on the nightstand was identical. My bedroom was unmistakable. I stared out my own window, suddenly hyper-aware of how easy it was to see into my home at night if the curtains weren't pulled tight. Who had taken these photos and when? Asterisk, I felt a wave of nausea and revulsion. This man, this stranger, had stood outside my window, in the dark, and watched me while I slept. I threw the camera into a plastic grocery bag as if it were contaminated, grabbed my keys, and drove straight to the Beaverton police station on Griffith Drive. My hands shook uncontrollably as I explained everything to a detective named Ryan Carson. He had a calm, reassuring demeanor, but I could see the concern in his eyes as he looked at the photos on the camera's small screen. He took the camera and the memory card as evidence and assured me they'd look into it. 2 days later, Detective Carson called. His voice was calm, but serious. The camera belonged to a man named Stephen Grant, he said. He lived in your neighborhood until about 2 years ago. He was arrested in late 2016 for stalking a woman who lived nearby, but the charges were dropped due to a lack of hard evidence. My blood ran cold. Grant had disappeared shortly after that, Carson explained. Nobody had seen him since. Did you find anything else out? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Carson paused. We talked to the woman who sold you the camera. Turns out she wasn't exactly truthful. Stephen Grant wasn't her ex-husband. They were never married. She was just his landlord. He vanished without paying rent, leaving most of his stuff behind. She'd been selling it off piece by piece over the last couple of years, just wanted to be rid of him and anything that reminded her of him. But the photos, my bedroom, I stammered, feeling dizzy. The timestamp on those photos, Carson interrupted quietly, his words landing like a punch to the gut, was from the last night Grant was seen 2 years ago. I went cold. Grant had been at my window watching me sleep 2 years ago and nobody had known. The previous resident of my house had been his target, and when she moved out and I moved in, he hadn't stopped. He just continued watching. Asterisk, I changed my locks that afternoon. I bought thick blackout curtains and a state-of-the-art security camera system. I tried not to think about it, to put it behind me. But every time night fell and I closed those curtains tight, I wondered. Stephen Grant had vanished, but that didn't mean he was gone. He's still out there somewhere. Maybe he moved far away. Or maybe he's just down the street, living in another quiet suburb, under another name. Maybe, just maybe, he's standing quietly in the shadows again, a new camera in his hand, watching, waiting. After all, I never heard of him being found, and sometimes, when I'm home alone at night, I can't shake the feeling that I'm still being watched. Last July, my wife Melissa and I decided to hold a yard sale at our home in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. It wasn't something we were excited about, but it felt necessary. Melissa's grandfather had recently passed away, and he'd been a bit of a pack rat. He left us with an attic full of antiques, old furniture, and boxes of things that hadn't seen the light of day in decades. Our own house was starting to feel cluttered, suffocated by the possessions of a man we both loved and missed. Dearly, the plan was simple. Sell what we could, donate the rest, and reclaim our living space. We wanted our home to be ours again. The morning of the sale began quietly. We live on a peaceful, tree-lined street where everyone knows everyone else. Neighbors drifted in and out, browsed the tables we'd set up in the driveway, which were filled with vintage lamps, stacks of old vinyl records, and dusty picture frames. A few serious-looking antique collectors stopped by, their eyes scanning for hidden treasures. They asked polite questions, negotiated prices, and shared stories about similar pieces they'd found. Everything was ordinary, friendly, and exactly what we expected. At least, it wasn't till about noon. That's when an older man, probably in his mid-60s, approached our tables. He moved with a strange silence, a stark contrast to the casual chatter of the other customers. He wore a worn denim jacket despite the summer heat, had thinning gray hair, and carried himself with a stiff, almost formal posture. Unlike most people who would offer a friendly hello, this man said nothing. His eyes, are pale and unsettling. Blue quickly scanned our offerings, dismissing most of it with a glance. Then, they landed sharply on a pair of antique binoculars. They had belonged to Melissa's grandfather, probably from the 1940s. They were leather-bound and remarkably well-preserved, a beautiful piece of history. Without a word, the man picked them up. He turned them over and over in his hands, inspecting every detail with an unnerving focus. His hands trembled slightly, a detail that I found strangely disturbing. I tried to engage him to break the uncomfortable silence. "Those were my wife's grandfathers," I said with a friendly smile. "He was in the Navy during the war." The man remained silent, his attention completely absorbed by the binoculars. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a wad of cash, handed but me the exact asking price, and walked away briskly, without a single word of acknowledgement. We watched him leave, a little unsettled by the odd transaction, but we shrugged it off as just eccentric behavior. Yard sales attracted all kinds of people after all. We forgot about him until the following weekend. It was a Sunday evening around twilight. The sky was a beautiful mix of orange and purple, and a sense of calm had settled over the neighborhood. Melissa was in the kitchen washing dishes while I prepared dinner. I glanced out the kitchen window, which overlooked our backyard, and I noticed movement near the fence line that separated our property from the woods behind it. At first I assumed it was a deer or some other animal, but when I focused, my blood ran cold. It was a man standing quietly among the shadows of our garden, looking directly at our house through a pair of binoculars. My heart jumped into my throat. It took only a second to realize it was the same man, the man who had bought Melissa's grandfather's binoculars. Without thinking, I threw open the back door and rushed into the yard, shouting, "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" Melissa was right behind me, her face a mask of confusion and fear. As soon as the man heard us, he bolted. He moved with surprising speed for a man his age, crashing through the underbrush and disappearing into the dusk of the woods. We stood there in the silent yard, our hearts pounding in our chests, staring into the empty darkness where he had been. We debated calling the police, but ultimately, we convinced ourselves it was just a bizarre one-off incident. Perhaps he lived nearby and was just a strange, nosy neighbor. We tried to rationalize it, to push away the fear that had taken root in our hearts. Days passed quietly, but the uneasiness remained. It was a quiet anxiety that we never fully discussed, but it lingered in our routines. It subtly altered a sense of safety we'd always taken for granted in our home. We started locking the doors even when we were home, something we'd never bothered to do before. The following Thursday, I was working a late shift at the office. My phone had been on silent, buried under a pile of paperwork on my desk. Around 10:30 p.m., as I was preparing to head home, I glanced at my phone and froze in disbelief. There were 20 missed calls, all from Melissa. I immediately dialed her back, a wave of panic rising in my chest. The phone rang and rang, but she didn't answer. I grabbed my keys and sped home, pushing the speed limits and ignoring stop signs, my mind racing with 1,000 horrible scenarios. As I pulled onto our street, my heart sank. 2 police cars were parked in our driveway, their blue and red lights flashing silently in the night, casting an eerie glow in our house. The front window was shattered, glass scattered across the porch and the front lawn. My mind raced, imagining the worst. But a wave of relief, so powerful it almost buckled my knees, flooded through me when I saw Melissa standing inside, visibly shaking but physically unharmed. Speaking quietly with 2 police officers, she told me what had happened, her voice quivering. Around 9:30, she'd felt that same horrible feeling, the feeling of being watched. Peering out the back window, she saw him again, the same older man, standing quietly at the back fence, the binoculars aimed at the house. Terrified, she ran to lock the doors, but within moments, she heard the sound of breaking glass. She rushed to the kitchen, grabbing a knife from the counter, and dialed 911 as she barricaded herself in the pantry. By the time the officers arrived, the man was gone. They searched the area with flashlights but found nothing. Melissa described the man clearly, but without more evidence. The police had little to pursue. The next morning we installed a state-of-the-art security system. We reinforced our windows and promised ourselves we'd be more vigilant. Yet, despite all the precautions, our sense of security was irrevocably damaged. Exactly 1 week later, returning from work, Melissa called me, her voice frantic. She had discovered a ladder leaning against the side of our house, placed carefully beneath our second-story bedroom window. Nothing appeared to be disturbed inside, but the implication was terrifyingly clear. Someone had attempted to gain entry again. We didn't wait around to see if he'd return. Within a month, we had moved across town into a smaller, newer place with better security. Our old home sold quickly, and we did our best to leave behind what had happened, hoping that distance might ease our lingering fear. But at months later, while unpacking the last of our boxes, Melissa came across an old photograph of her grandfather. In the picture, he was a young man smiling, holding those very same binoculars. She turned the old photograph over in her hands, lost in thought, and then she asked softly, almost to herself, why those binoculars? Of all the things at the yard sale, why did he want those? Only then did a chilling thought cross my mind, a thought so horrifying in its implications that it made my blood run cold. What if the man hadn't been interested in the binoculars themselves, but rather in the view they provided? What if he had bought them specifically because they had belonged to her grandfather? What if he knew exactly who we were? Perhaps he had been watching us for far longer than we realized, hidden quietly in the background of our lives, waiting patiently for an opportunity that we could never fully understand. The worst part is, we'll probably never know the truth, and we'll never know if he's still out there, watching someone else.